Hello, everyone. Today we meet again in a new space, with a new story full of chills and mysteries. Prepare yourself, because today's tale is not for the faint of heart. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any upcoming stories. It's exciting to have you join me on each adventure into the otherworldly. Alright, buckle up, because we're diving deep into a night you won't soon forget. Ever wondered what it truly feels like when the world outside your window turns upside down? When those distant emergency sirens suddenly become your new reality? Pull up a chair, because tonight, we're not just telling a story, we're reliving a descent into chaos, one chilling moment at a time. It all started on what I genuinely believed would be another run-of-the-mill shift in the emergency department. Overnight intern, that was me. My job description usually included things like deciphering chicken scratch on patient charts, calming down families who were convinced a mild cough was the plague, and essentially trying not to drown in the endless tide of paperwork. The controlled chaos of a hospital at night was something I was slowly getting used to, finding my rhythm amidst the beeping machines and hushed anxieties. Reassuring the worried, juggling tasks, that was the intern life. But from the second I swiped my badge and those sliding doors hissed open, there was a static in the air. Not the electrical kind, more like a feeling, a tension you could almost taste. Subtle, at first, like a whisper in a crowded room, but it grew, thickened, until it was impossible to ignore. Looking back, it was like the world itself was holding its breath. Earlier, as I was pulling into the hospital parking lot, I'd caught a snippet of an emergency alert on the car radio. Crackly, monotone voice. The kind that makes your hairs stand on end even when you're not really listening. Something about staying indoors, an unknown contagion, parts of the city. It all sounded vague, sensationalized, like another one of those local news blow-ups that evaporate by morning. I'd switched off the radio, more interested in finding a decent parking spot before my shift officially began. Honestly, I'd figured it was just some flu strain going around, hyped up for ratings. The hospital lobby was deceptively normal. The gentle hum of the overhead lights, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the low murmur of staff chatter. All the usual comforting sounds of a place dedicated to healing. But beneath the surface, everyone seemed restless. Every snippet of conversation I overheard seemed to orbit around the same unsettling keywords: strange bites, agitated behavior. Barely had I dumped my bag in the staff room when Janice, a senior nurse with eyes that had seen it all, cornered me. "Hey, rookie," she started, her voice low and urgent, eyes darting around as if the walls themselves had ears. "You heard anything about what's going down out there?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Just that emergency alert on the radio. Sounded like the usual scare tactics. Janice shook her head, her usual brisk energy replaced by a nervous flutter. "Honey, this ain't usual. They're saying it's some kind of widespread infection. People are acting wild, not themselves. Paramedics are pulling their hair out." I raised an eyebrow. "Wild how?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Trust me, something's going on. We've had calls flooding in, paramedics talking about people, attacking strangers on the street, unprovoked. Some are even calling it a zombie outbreak." She actually said the word zombie, forcing a tight, nervous little laugh that didn't reach her eyes. It hung there between us, absurd and chilling all at once. "Just be ready, kiddo. My gut's telling me it's going to be a long night." For the first hour, things were almost normal. A steady trickle of the usual ER fare. Sprained ankles from late-night stumbles, lingering coughs that worried new parents, a kid with a rash that looked more like playground dirt than anything contagious. Routine. Mundane. Almost made me think Janice was overreacting. Then, around midnight, the ambulance bay doors rattled, a harsh, metallic sound that sliced through the hum of the ER. Paramedics burst in, pushing a stretcher with frantic urgency. Strapped down to the gurney was a man, thrashing, mumbling incoherently. His eyes were unfocused, wild, snapping at the air as if fighting off invisible attackers. I'd never seen anything like it. "Male, mid-30s," one of the paramedics yelled, his voice tight with adrenaline and something else, unease. "Found wandering in traffic, possible bite marks on his arm, became aggressive en route. His voice actually shook, just a tremor, but it was there. We swarmed around, adrenaline kicking in, moving the stretcher with practiced efficiency to a curtained-off bay. 2 security guards, burly guys who usually looked like they could handle anything, hurried over to help keep the patient from, well, lashing out. Bite marks, the paramedic had said. In the chaos, I'd only caught a fleeting glimpse. The man's sleeve was ripped, and yeah, there was a crusty, dark outline on his forearm. Part of me, the intern in me, wanted to lean in, get a closer look, dissect the injury. But the bigger part of me, the human part, just wanted to help keep this guy still, calm him down, make sure he didn't hurt himself or anyone else. Doctor needed to examine him. Stat. Over the next half hour, it was like the ambulance bay doors had become a revolving door of the bizarre. Paramedics kept arriving, each with a story more unsettling than the last. Individuals found disoriented, combative, some wandering aimlessly, others actively violent. And the injuries, those kept coming up too. Strange injuries that looked suspiciously like they came from human teeth. One older woman, frail as a bird, was trembling so violently we had to wrap her in heated blankets just to keep her from shivering right off the bed. Another man, as soon as the paramedics unstrapped him, actually lunged, tried to bite a nurse. Security tackled him just in time, but the air in the ER crackled with raw nerves. Something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. It was around 1:30 a.m. when the second overhead announcement blasted through the intercom, cutting through the mounting tension like a knife. This time, it wasn't the usual cheerful hospital announcements. This was different. A stern, automated voice, cold and devoid of emotion, echoed through the hallway. Attention all staff. This is an emergency alert. The hospital is moving to partial lockdown. All available personnel, please report to your stations. Partial lockdown. Even that phrase sent a ripple of panic through both patients and staff. We'd had drills, of course, codes and procedures for everything from fires to active shooters. But nothing had ever felt like this. Real. Imminent. A few staff members frantically tried to call home, but cell networks were already starting to flake out, calls dropping, connections failing. The landlines? Forget it. Every time we dialed, dead air or a relentless busy signal. Cut off. My job, basic triage, meant I was glued to the entrance. The sliding doors hissed open and shut, letting in a stream of frantic people, eyes wide with terror, stories tumbling out in broken fragments. Attacked by neighbors, strangers on the street. Words like unsteady walk, vacant eyes, raspy groaning kept cropping up. Zombie whispers started circulating among the staff, hushed, disbelieving, but persistent. They're like zombies. Is this some kind of zombie outbreak? Then, the lights flickered, just for a heartbeat, but enough to make everyone freeze, mid-sentence, mid-stride. Darkness threatened. Then just as quickly, the emergency generator roared to life, kicking in with a reassuring hum, bathing the corridor once more in its sterile, unwavering glow. But the flicker had been a warning, a taste of what was to come. By now, the waiting area was packed, overflowing with uneasy survivors who'd fled their homes, seeking sanctuary in the one place they thought should be safe. Some moaned about sudden, raging fevers. Others had shallow, unexplained scratches on their arms, strange bruises blossoming on their skin. All of them wore the same expression, a cocktail of raw anxiety and bone-deep exhaustion. I did what I could, the intern thing. Swabbing wounds with antiseptic wipes, slapping on bandages for the shallow cuts, taking vital signs, trying to project calm into the swirling vortex of fear. But with each patient I encountered exhibiting that vacant, unfocused stare, those inexplicable marks, a cold, prickling chill crawled up my spine. That's when I noticed it. The triage software on my tablet, usually so reliable, was glitching, freezing. Or maybe it wasn't glitching, maybe it was just drowning, overwhelmed. We'd never had this volume of patients, this rapid influx, all with the same terrifying pattern. Bite wounds, agitation, feverish symptoms. The system was buckling under the weight of the unfolding nightmare. Then, At approximately 2:15 a.m., the overhead speakers crackled again. This time, the message wasn't just an alert. It was a hammer blow. "Attention," the cold, automated voice boomed. "We have received an emergency alert from local authorities. A potential infection event is in progress outside. A citywide curfew is now in effect. This facility is moving to a full lockdown. No one may leave or enter until further notice." Full lockdown. My stomach plummeted. I exchanged a stricken look with a few coworkers. This wasn't a drill. This was real. Outside, beyond the glass doors, the world was collapsing. The steel shutters in front of the emergency department's main entrance began to grind down, a slow, mechanical groan that sealed us in, cutting us off from whatever was happening out there. Visitors rushed to the doors, protesting, banging on the glass, desperation etched on their faces. Security staff, looking grim and overwhelmed, did their best to maintain some semblance of order, but you could feel the panic simmering, ready to boil over. An uneasy hush fell over the entire waiting area, a silence more terrifying than any scream. Locked in a hospital. Normally, that would be reassuring. Safety, help on the way. But the rumors, the whispers of a zombie outbreak, they poisoned everything, shattered any illusion of safety. Infected, the word became a toxic currency, tossed around in hushed tones whenever a new patient arrived with that glassy stare, that unsettling aggression. Infected. People whispered theories, desperate to make sense of the senseless. Bites, they said. The infection spreads through bites. Others insisted it was airborne. A virus ripping through the city. No one knew. All we had were fragments, pieces of a terrifying, incomplete puzzle. The newly arrived patients, the ones showing the worst signs, the violence, the blank eyes, the inhuman growls, they were being taken to the isolation wing. Quarantine. Containment. I followed Dr. Malik, a veteran ER doc who always seemed calm in the face of chaos, down a dimly lit corridor, wanting to help, wanting to be useful. The lights were flickering erratically now, strobing on and off, a frantic pulse in the failing power grid. We stumbled over rolling gurneys abandoned mid-roll, tripped over knocked-over 4 stands, trying to navigate the increasingly chaotic hallways towards the isolation area. We rounded a corner and nearly collided with a nurse, sprinting towards us, eyes wide with pure, unadulterated panic. She was breathless, gasping for air. "They're coming through," she choked out. "Who?" Dr. Malik demanded, leaning in, his voice sharp, urgent. "Who's coming through?" "The patients," she stammered, swallowing hard, terror making her words ragged. They broke loose. And they're attacking people. My mind raced, painting grotesque images. The newly infected patients, those thrashing, mumbling figures we'd seen earlier, staggering out of their beds, driven by some monstrous, primal hunger, trying to feed. Even though the word zombies had only been whispered, a ridiculous, unbelievable word, my heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. What if it wasn't just a word anymore? Dr. Malik, ever pragmatic, ever in control, muttered a quick plan, his voice low, decisive. "We barricade the corridor near the isolation wing. You," he pointed at me, his gaze locking onto mine, sharp and commanding in the flickering light. "Help me gather some supplies. We may need to treat injuries here." No hesitation, no argument, just adrenaline-fueled action. We bolted towards a nearby storage room, the urgency propelling us forward. Inside, rows of sterile boxes lined the shelves, gloves, face shields, gowns, the tools of our trade now suddenly transformed into weapons of survival. A few battery-powered lanterns were shoved haphazardly in a corner. I grabbed armfuls of supplies, stuffing gloves and face shields into my pockets, clutching boxes of bandages and antiseptic wipes, my eyes darting nervously to the door, half expecting it to swing open, revealing something infected. Back in the corridor, more staff had arrived, drawn by the chaos, adrenaline pumping, faces grim. We started improvising, shoving wheelchairs, heavy medical cabinets, anything we could find, across the corridor entrance, creating a makeshift barricade, a flimsy line of defense against what? I didn't want to think the word. Over the top of the barricade, in the dim light of the corridor beyond, I could see movement. Flickers of silhouettes swaying back and forth in the darkness. Then, a muffled moan, low and guttural, drifted from down the hall, followed by a sharp bang, the sound of something heavy hitting the wall. Then another bang, closer. Whatever was on the other side was definitely trying to get through. Martinez, one of the security guards, his face pale but resolute, hollered, "Everyone back away. If they break down this barricade, we'll need to retreat to a secure location." The banging intensified, rhythmic, relentless. My pulse hammered in my ears, so loud I could barely hear anything else. A nurse beside me, young, barely out of training, trembled, clutching a pair of scissors like they were some kind of magic talisman. It was a feeble defense, a pathetic barricade against the unknown, but at least it was something. Then, all at once, the noise stopped. Abruptly, silence descended, heavy, suffocating. Just faint shuffling sounds remained, distant, unsettling. It was as if the infected had wandered off. But that kind of silence in a situation like this, it was worse. It didn't bring relief. It just ratcheted up the tension, twisting it tighter, coiling it around our throats. Dr. Malik turned to me, his voice low, urgent. "We should get back to the main floor. We need to regroup, see if we can figure out how to handle this growing chaos." I nodded, swallowing down a lump of fear that felt lodged in my throat. Together, we left the flimsy barricade in place, a symbolic gesture, and made our way back to the main triage area. The halls felt different now, claustrophobic, menacing. The white fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting elongated, distorted shadows that danced in our peripheral vision. The elevator was dead, of course, out of service. We tiptoed down the stairwell, the echo of our footsteps amplified in the stairwell's concrete confines, the overhead announcement still playing on an endless, maddening loop. "This is an emergency alert, unknown contagion. Remain calm. Seek shelter. Await further instructions. Calm." Impossible. Returning to the triage area, we were met with a new wave of something. Not just panic, not just fear. Confusion. Despair. Cell phones were completely dead. No signal, no service, just useless bricks in our hands. The wall-mounted TVs, usually blaring daytime talk shows or local news, were filled with nothing but static, a blizzard of white noise. Except for one screen, flickering to life intermittently, showed a single, stark emergency broadcast message against a black screen. "Zombie outbreak in your area. Seek immediate shelter." No images, no explanation, just those words, stark, terrifying, repeated over and over again. People slumped in chairs, eyes glazed with terror, fatigue etched deep into their faces. Some cried silently, arms wrapped around loved ones, a desperate embrace against the encroaching darkness. Others tried to project a facade of calm, but the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Staff members, stretched thin, were short-tempered, snapping at each other, at patients. Medical supplies, already dwindling, were becoming a precious commodity. Desperate for any scrap of information, Janice, bless her persistent heart, tried the landlines again. Still busy, she fiddled with the hospital's internal communication system, hoping for something, anything, but all she got was an endless, monotonous beep, beep, beep. It was as though the entire world outside had gone dark, silent, cut off. Amidst the mounting chaos, I spotted Dr. Malik again, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with the hospital administrator, a man named Mr. Henderson, whose usual bureaucratic demeanor had completely crumbled, replaced by a raw, naked fear. I was close enough to catch snippets of their conversation. Words like, "Infection is spreading faster than we can contain. Can't keep them locked up forever. We don't have the resources." Their faces were grim, etched with a despair that mirrored the growing fear in my own heart. Just then, a commotion erupted, ripping through the suffocating tension. A man in tattered clothes, looking like he'd been dragged through hell and back, stumbled out from behind a curtained bay, eyes distant, Unfocused, he lurched, moving with an unsettling, jerky gait, towards a group of people huddled together on a row of chairs. Security dashed forward, reacting instantly, tackling him, restraining him before he could reach the terrified bystanders. But in the brief, violent struggle, it happened. He bit one of the guards, right on the hand. A collective gasp rippled through the triage area, a wave of horror washing over everyone. The guard, young, barely more than a kid, staggered back, clutching his injured hand, face contorted in pain and dawning dread. We quickly, efficiently, ushered the infected man away, back behind the curtains, isolating him, containing him. But the guard, he stood there, pale, uncertain, staring at the puncture wounds on his hand. Someone, bless their quick thinking, offered to bandage him up. But as I watched, a cold dread settled in my stomach. We had all seen how quickly the infection could take hold, how fast things could change. Would he be all right? Would he remain himself? Or was it just a matter of time? Around 3 a.m., the backup generators started stuttering, the lights flickering more frequently now, a frantic, uneven pulse. To conserve power, they dimmed, casting the corridors into deeper shadows, amplifying the fear that already lurked in every corner. Dr. Malik, still taking charge, still trying to find a path through the chaos, led a small team, me included, to a second-story window, hoping, desperately, for some kind of information, a sign, anything that could tell us what was happening outside these increasingly fragile walls. We found a dusty, unused corridor, the air thick with the smell of stale air and forgotten cleaning supplies. At the end of the corridor, a wide window overlooked the hospital parking lot. What we saw made my heart plummet. The streets were wrong, oddly quiet, eerily still, lit only by the pale, flickering glow of street lamps. Parked cars were scattered haphazardly, angled across lanes, abandoned mid-drive, frozen in time. A few distant figures lurched aimlessly along the sidewalks, moving with that same unsteady gait we'd seen in the infected patients. More of them, very likely more infected. The hospital parking area itself was almost deserted, an expanse of empty asphalt stretching out under the cold, indifferent moonlight. Except for one thing. A single ambulance, parked near the bay doors, sat idle, doors slightly ajar, interior lights flickering on and off, like a distress signal, a ghostly echo of a call for help that would never be answered. No sirens wailed, no horns honked. The city felt abandoned, empty, dead. Occasionally, we caught glimpses of movement between the rows of parked cars, shadowy shapes scurrying, darting, too quick to clearly identify. Survivors? Scavengers? Or something more sinister? Something hunting? Impossible to tell. Without cell service, without any stable communication, we were cut off, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. We had no idea how widespread the crisis might be, how far it had spread, how much of the city, or the world, had succumbed. But if the official emergency alert was urging everyone to stay indoors, if it had escalated to this, then it had to be serious. Catastrophically serious. Maybe it was everywhere. Suddenly, a loud crash jolted us back to the terrifying reality of our immediate surroundings. It sounded like something heavy, something solid, had fallen, collapsed, on the floor below. A moment later, screams echoed up the stairwell, raw, primal screams of terror and pain. Without hesitation, without a word, we sprinted back down the corridor, adrenaline surging, fear lending wings to our feet. We arrived back in the triage area just in time to see them. 2 infected individuals, staggering, lurching, right there in the triage area, amidst the cowering survivors. The makeshift barricade we'd erected near the isolation wing, it must have failed. Somewhere, somehow, they'd broken through. Or found another way. People scattered, screaming, tripping over chairs, scrambling for any escape route. Some staff members, bless their bravery, tried to contain the threat, grabbing anything that could be used as a weapon. Mops, brooms, even bedpans, futile gestures against the encroaching horror. Others, overwhelmed by terror, simply ran, joining the panicked stampede. One of the intruders, a gaunt man, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes completely vacant, moved unsteadily towards a cluster of cowering bystanders, prey frozen in fear. The second intruder, a woman, her face contorted in a silent snarl, a glazed stare fixed straight ahead, stumbled behind him. I saw a long, livid scratch across her forearm, raw and weeping. My heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it would explode, a frantic drum against my ribs. Dr. Malik, ever the pragmatist, ever the leader, signaled for me, his eyes locking onto mine, his gaze urgent and determined. "Help me guide the frightened bystanders," he yelled over the rising tide of screams, into a nearby hallway, while security tries to wrangle those things. No time to think, no time to question. Just instinct, adrenaline, the primal urge to protect. We herded the terrified group, about a dozen people, towards a safer area, pushing them, guiding them, urging them forward. The hospital's generator lights flickered ominously, casting wild, jumping shadows that danced on the walls, distorting everything, amplifying the nightmare. We ended up near the pediatric ward, eerily quiet. Most of the children had been discharged earlier in the evening, a strange, unsettling blessing in disguise, clearing space, ironically, for this. The corridors were deserted, silent, amplifying the sense of isolation, of vulnerability. Dr. Malik led us into a small waiting room, a child-sized table with tiny chairs pushed against the wall, cartoon characters faded on the wallpaper. He quietly closed the door behind us, sealing us in, a thin barrier against the chaos raging outside. Once inside, he didn't hesitate. He locked the door. An old-fashioned key, thankfully still in the nurse's station desk drawer. A solid click echoed in the small room, a sound of finality. The group let out a collective sigh, a shuddering release of pent-up breath, but a heavy, oppressive silence settled almost immediately after. Everyone was thinking the same thing. How do we get out of this? Are we truly safe here? Behind this flimsy wooden door? The small waiting room had a television mounted high on the wall, usually tuned to cartoons to distract anxious kids. Now, it displayed only the same text-based emergency alert message, stark white letters against a black screen. Zombie outbreak. Seek shelter. Avoid contact. Zombie outbreak. There it was again. The word. We flipped through channels, frantically, desperately seeking any other information, any news, any sign of hope. Static, static, and more static. A wasteland of white noise. Dr. Malik, ever practical, started taking a quick inventory of supplies. Vending machine in the corner, stocked with bottled water and a few energy bars. Meager rations, but something. Most importantly, we still had a small stash of medical kits, the ones I grabbed earlier. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, pain relievers. Not much, but enough. Maybe, to dress wounds, keep ourselves hydrated, keep the fear at bay for a little while longer. A few others from our huddled group started introducing themselves, hushed, hesitant voices breaking the oppressive silence. Margaret, a middle-aged woman, her face etched with worry, her spouse still stuck at home, somewhere out there in the chaos. Derek, a man who'd been visiting his cousin in the hospital, now trapped, separated from family, from the world outside. And Tiana, a nurse's aide, stranded, missing her ride home, now caught in a nightmare far beyond her training. Each told a snippet of their story, fragments of terror, glimpses of the unfolding apocalypse. Strange attacks, the city in turmoil, the relentless emergency alerts urging everyone to stay indoors. No one was sure if help was coming, if there even was help coming. For a little while, we just sat there, huddled together, intense silence broken only by the frantic rhythm of our own breathing, listening, straining to hear any sound from outside, any sign of movement, any clue about what lay beyond the locked door. The overhead lights dipped again, the generator grumbling angrily, a mechanical beast struggling to keep the darkness at bay. Suddenly, a faint tapping at the door. Everyone froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Tiana motioned frantically for us to be quiet, pressing a finger to her lips. We held our breath, listening. A soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging against wood. Another tap, more insistent this time. Then silence. Agonizing silence. The handle jiggled. Just a subtle tremor, but enough to send a jolt of pure terror through me. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Slowly, cautiously, Dr. Malik approached the door, moving like he was walking through treacle, each step deliberate, measured. He pressed his ear against the cool wood, listening intently. "Who's there?" he called softly, his voice barely above a whisper at first. No response, just silence. Then, a voice. Weak, raspy, barely audible. "Please help me." Margaret gasped, a choked sound in the suffocating silence. "It's a survivor," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. She immediately started to move towards the door, a desperate urgency in her movements. Dr. Malik held up a hand, stopping her. "Stay back," he told her, his voice firm, though his own face was etched with uncertainty. To the person outside, he called out again, louder this time, his voice carrying a thread of caution, of suspicion. "Are you alone?" "Yes," came the voice again, ragged, unsure, laced with pain. "Yes, I'm just hurt. Please let me in." A moral dilemma, sharp and brutal, tearing through the room. Could we risk it? Risk letting in someone who might be infected? Someone who could bring the nightmare right into our sanctuary? On the other hand, could we just leave someone out there, potentially injured, helpless, at the mercy of whatever horrors roamed the hallways? Could we live with that? Dr. Malik looked at me, his eyebrows furrowed, his gaze searching, seeking my input, my opinion. The weight of the decision, the potential consequences, pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating. My mind raced, spinning through the limited options, the impossible choices. Finally, I nodded, just a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was a decision. "Open the door," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with a grim resolve. "But carefully. We can't abandon someone who might need help, but we can't be stupid about it either." A fragile, precarious plan formed in the suffocating silence. We positioned ourselves, ready to secure the door if needed, ready to slam it shut again if danger lurked on the other side. Tiana stood braced behind the door, ready to slam it closed if necessary. Margaret, despite her fear, braced herself against a chair, ready to provide some kind of support, and I stood ready with a rolled-up blanket, a pathetic, laughable defense, hardly a perfect weapon, but it was something. Anything was something in this moment of agonizing uncertainty. Dr. Malik slowly, deliberately, turned the key in the lock, the metallic click echoing in the tense silence. He cracked the door open, just a sliver at first, peering cautiously into the dimly lit corridor. Then, he widened it a fraction more. A young woman stumbled inside, leaning heavily on the doorframe, gasping for breath, her face pale, streaked with dirt and tears. Shallow, ragged breaths wheezed from her lungs. I caught sight of her arm, wrapped in a makeshift bandage, stained with something dark, ominously dark. She looked utterly terrified, eyes wide, darting around the room, taking in our faces, our huddled group. "Thank you," she breathed, just a whisper, her voice trembling with exhaustion and relief. We shut the door quickly, decisively, locking it again behind her, sealing ourselves back in, but now, with another soul in our fragile sanctuary. Tiana gently guided her to a nearby chair, offering a quiet word of reassurance. I rummaged through our meager supply kit, grabbing bandages, antiseptic wipes, trying to be useful, trying to focus on something practical, something tangible, to push back against the rising tide of fear. The woman introduced herself as Lacey. She'd been in the hospital earlier that day, for a minor outpatient procedure, only to get trapped when the lockdown was announced, the world outside turning upside down while she was stuck within these walls. At some point, in the escalating chaos, she'd gotten separated from everyone else. Derek, the visitor, the quiet one, finally spoke, his voice laced with a hesitant caution, a barely veiled suspicion. Did you get bit?" he asked, his eyes fixed on her bandaged arm, a silent question hanging in the air. She shook her head, wincing slightly as she moved, the movement pulling at her injured arm. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I cut myself on a broken door handle, trying to escape someone who was chasing me." She shivered, even in the warm room, goosebumps rising on her pale arms. He had this strange blank look, like nothing was behind his eyes. Dr. Malik, ever the doctor, studied her carefully, his gaze assessing, professional, but still carrying that undercurrent of caution. He gently, expertly, unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The wound, a jagged, bloody gash on her forearm, looked like a cut, not a bite. Relief, fragile and tentative, washed over the room. We breathed a collective, almost silent, sigh of relief. Though, even as we cleaned the wound, disinfected it, wrapped it in a sterile dressing, offered her water, a sip at a time, a gnawing unease remained. We couldn't be entirely certain, not about anything anymore. While we tended to Lacey, the tension outside seemed to ratchet up again. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, closer this time, more purposeful, followed by muffled scraping sounds, like something dragging itself along the floor. It sounded like more than one presence. Then, a low groan drifted through the crack beneath the door, a sound that chilled me to the bone, a sound that felt inhuman. My blood turned cold, a sudden, icy paralysis gripping me. Tiana, quick-thinking, decisive, flicked off the light switch in our waiting room, plunging us into relative darkness. The room went black, save for the faint, eerie red glow of the exit sign above the door, a small beacon in the encroaching night. We held our breath, straining our ears, listening as shadows slid past the crack beneath the door, monstrous silhouettes in the dim light. The handle rattled again, once, twice, then stopped. Silence again, but this time it felt different, heavier, more menacing. We prayed, silently, desperately, fervently. We prayed that whoever, or whatever, was out there would just move on, wander away, leave us alone in our fragile sanctuary. Finally, after an eternity that stretched out beyond all sense of time, the footsteps receded, fading into the distance, replaced by an unsettling quiet. Our group remained silent, frozen in place, straining to hear any clue about the corridor's safety, about the threat that still lingered just outside the door. When we were reasonably sure, as sure as we could be, that the immediate danger had passed, Dr. Malik motioned for us to gather around, his movements slow, deliberate, cautious. "We can't stay here forever," he whispered, his voice low, barely audible in the darkness. "We need to find a safer part of the hospital, or get out. This place isn't secure. Not anymore. If those infected things are roaming the halls. But how can we leave?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking, barely a breath. "We can't just unlock those doors and walk into a hallway full of zombies." The word hung in the air again, heavy, surreal, terrifyingly real. None of us truly wanted to believe it. Zombie outbreak. It sounded like something out of a bad movie. Yet, we'd all witnessed enough, seen enough, heard enough to know that something unnatural, something monstrous, was happening. "We'll wait," Dr. Malik explained, his voice calm, measured, trying to inject some semblance of reason into the chaos. "We'll wait until it's quieter. Maybe we can head for the roof, or try to access the secure wing. If we can barricade ourselves properly, somewhere more defensible, we might be able to hold out. Until help arrives." Hope, a fragile, flickering ember in the overwhelming darkness. Another hour crept by, agonizingly slow, each minute stretching out into an eternity. The only sounds were our own shallow breathing, the occasional drip of a faulty pipe somewhere in the walls, the distant, unsettling groans that still echoed faintly from the hallway outside. Around 4:15 a.m., the air thick with unspoken fears, we mustered the courage, the desperate resolve, to open the door again, to peek back into the unknown. Dr. Malik took the lead, his face grim, his movements deliberate. He unlocked the door, slowly, silently, and cracked it open, just enough to peer out into the corridor. Dim, illuminated only by the faint, red glow of emergency lights, casting long, distorted shadows. Silence. Suffocating silence. Dr. Malik, followed by Tiana, then me, the rest of us trailing nervously behind, stepped back into the dark corridor. Our plan was desperate, half-formed, fueled by a desperate hope. We would try to reach the older section of the hospital, the East Wing, a forgotten part of the building, rumored to have fewer patient rooms, thicker walls, heavier doors. Maybe, just maybe, it would be easier to fortify, to defend. A desperate gamble in a world gone mad. We shuffled through the hallway, moving as quietly as possible, each footstep echoing unnervingly in the silence. Passing closed patient rooms, doors swallowed by shadows. Some were dark, silent, seemingly empty. Others had faint rustling sounds within, whispers of movement, shadows shifting just beyond the reach of our lantern beams. Occasionally, a low moan seeped from beneath a door, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck prickle with primal fear. We tried not to linger, tried not to imagine what lurked behind those closed doors, what horrors might be waiting in the shadows. Suddenly, Lacey clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve, her grip tight with sudden fear. "Did you hear that?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. In the distance, down the corridor, a sharp, echoing sound. A set of double doors slamming open. We froze, every muscle tensing, our breath catching in our throats. Through the gloom, we saw fleeting shapes, moving in the distance. 1, 2, maybe 3 figures. They moved jerkily, unnaturally, with stiff, awkward limbs, as if they were unsure how to walk, how to control their own bodies. My mind, against all reason, against all logic, conjured the word again. Zombies. Despite my desperate reluctance to even think it, let alone say it out loud. We pressed ourselves against the cold, sterile wall, flattening ourselves against the shadows, praying, desperately praying, that they wouldn't notice us, wouldn't hear us, wouldn't sense our presence in the oppressive darkness. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, loud enough, I was sure, to drown out the faint, raspy groans that now echoed in the corridor, closer now, more distinct, more threatening. The group of infected, if that's what they were, swayed from side to side, drifting, aimless, but moving in our general direction. I held my breath until my lungs burned, until my vision started to blur at the edges, willing myself to be invisible, to be silent, to be nothing. One of the figures paused, just a few yards from us, head tilting slightly to the side, as if listening, as if sensing something in the silence. I worried, irrationally, desperately, that it could hear the frantic pounding of my heart, could smell our fear, could know we were there. Then, just as suddenly as it had paused, it stumbled onward, resuming its jerky, aimless drift, and the group disappeared around a bend in the corridor, swallowed by the shadows. Dr. Malik gestured urgently for us to keep moving, his eyes wide, his face pale but resolute. No time to waste, no time to linger. We hurried, almost ran, towards a side door, a narrow doorway that opened into a stairwell, desperate to put distance between us and them. The metal steps groaned under our feet, each clang echoing unnervingly in the stairwell's confined space, amplified by the silence. In a crisis like this, every noise felt like a beacon, a signal to the lurking shadows, a death knell waiting to be rung. Wincing at every creak, every groan, we reached the top floor of the old wing. The hallway here felt different, stale, like it hadn't been used, hadn't been breathed in weeks, maybe months. The air was thick with dust, the smell of decay, of forgotten things. Our flashlights, the small handheld beams from our emergency kits, sliced through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, cracked and dusty tile floors, the remnants of a forgotten era. Most of the patient rooms in this area were shuttered, padlocked, or used for storage, filled with forgotten medical equipment, dusty boxes, discarded furniture. It was our best chance, our only chance, maybe, at finding a secure hideout, a place to make a stand. Dr. Malik, leading the way, guided us towards a large room at the end of the hallway. A room that once served as a meeting area, a small conference room maybe. It had heavy double doors, solid and imposing. And inside, miraculously, we found furniture. A heavy wooden table, a few sturdy chairs, a dusty cabinet pushed against one wall. Enough, maybe, to barricade the entrance, to buy us some time. Once barricaded, the heavy table and chairs wedged against the double doors, we flicked on a few battery-powered lanterns, casting a soft, yellow glow across the room, illuminating the space just enough to see each other's exhausted, fear-etched faces. Just as we were about to sink down, collapse onto the dusty floor, Tiana let out a small cry, a sharp intake of breath that cut through the silence. We all turned, our heads snapping around, adrenaline spiking again, our hearts leaping into our throats. She was pointing, her finger trembling, at a shape slumped in the corner of the room, a dark, motionless mass against the pale wall. A figure, slumped against the wall, unmoving. A caretaker's uniform. Dr. Malik approached cautiously, slowly, his expression grave, his movements hesitant. The caretaker looked pale, unnaturally pale, and still, completely still. No movement, no sign of life. We edged closer, a silent, hesitant group, half expecting him to stir, to sit up, to reveal himself to be one of them. Dr. Malik crouched down beside the slumped figure, his movements gentle, respectful. He pressed 2 fingers to the caretaker's neck, searching for a pulse. Seconds stretched out, agonizingly slow, punctuated only by our shallow breaths. After a long, silent moment, he straightened up, his face somber, his eyes filled with a grim understanding. He turned to us, slowly, deliberately, and shook his head. No movement, no sign of life. He was gone. We all backed away, a somber realization settling over us, heavy, oppressive. Death. It was here, in this room, in this hospital, in this city, everywhere. We debated, in hushed whispers, what to do with the body. Dr. Malik advised we cover it with a sheet, a gesture of respect, of dignity in the face of unimaginable horror. The caretaker didn't appear to be infected. Not in the typical sense, at least. But in this new, terrifying world, nothing was certain. Nothing could be taken for granted. It felt disrespectful, inhumane, to just leave him there, slumped against the wall, forgotten. But we had no alternative. No time for proper burials. Survival had become the only priority. While moving a heavy cabinet, trying to strengthen our makeshift barricade, we heard voices outside. Muffled, indistinct at first, then clearer, closer. We froze, instantly alert, every muscle tense, unsure. Infected? Or could it be other survivors? Then, we caught a word. A single word carried on the muffled voices, filtering through the heavy door. Anyone in there? Derek, the quiet visitor, the one who'd been silent for most of the ordeal, suddenly rushed to the door, hope flickering in his eyes, a desperate eagerness in his movements. "We're survivors," he called out, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. Are you? A brief, agonizing pause. Then, a voice, hesitant, wary. "We are." "Yes. We were trying to find a safe spot. Let us in." Cautious as ever, Dr. Malik slid aside a chair, just enough to crack the door open a fraction. 2 people slipped into the room, quickly, silently, gratefully. One wearing scrubs, a familiar green uniform. The other in casual clothes, looking disheveled, exhausted. The one in scrubs, Sarah, a nurse from the night shift, someone I recognized from the ER. The other was a volunteer. She explained quickly. His name was Henry. Relief, fragile but real, washed over our small group at the sight of more friendly faces, more allies in this desperate fight for survival. Sarah was breathless, her face pale, streaked with sweat and dirt, but she managed to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush. We barricaded part of the corridor. Further down. But more of those zombie-like people are wandering around. everywhere. We barely got away. We helped them settle in, offering them water, a share of our meager energy bars. Henry had bruises blooming on his arms, evidence of a close call, a desperate struggle with an infected. Sarah recounted, her voice trembling, how the entire lower level, the main triage area, the ER, was overrun. Chaos. Horror. She warned us that the cafeteria area, once a potential source of supplies, was no longer safe. The hospital, our supposed sanctuary, had become a labyrinth of locked doors and roaming threats, a death trap in disguise. Our combined group now numbered 8. 8 souls huddled together in a dusty, forgotten meeting room in a dying hospital, in a city teetering on the brink of collapse. Dr. Malik, ever pragmatic, ever the strategist, reasoned that waiting here, passively, indefinitely, might not be a viable option. Not given the failing power, the dwindling resources, the ever-present threat just beyond the door. Sarah, her nurse's knowledge proving invaluable, mentioned that the roof access in this old wing was sometimes unlocked, for maintenance, for repairs. If we could reach the roof, maybe, just maybe, we could signal for help, or at least escape the immediate, claustrophobic threat of the infected within the building. Fresh air, open space, a chance to assess the wider situation. But fear gnawed at each of us, a cold, insidious dread. What if the roof was overrun too? What if the city beyond the hospital walls was beyond rescue? What if there was no help coming? What if this was it? This small, dusty room, these 8 souls, huddled together against the encroaching darkness, the last remnants of humanity in a world gone mad? Ultimately, we decided, desperate gambit, maybe foolish hope, but our best bet. We would try. We would try to reach the roof. Dawn was still hours away, the night still thick with shadows, but maybe, just maybe, the faint morning light would offer a sliver of safety, a chance to find a way out. We unblocked the door, as quietly as possible, each movement slow, deliberate, agonizingly careful. Stepped back into the dark corridor, the silence pressing down on us, heavy, suffocating. An occasional clang, a distant metallic echo, drifted from somewhere deeper within the building, unsettling, ominous. We navigated through the hallway, following Sarah's whispered directions towards the stairwell that, hopefully, led to the maintenance area, and from there, to the roof. Each door we passed, each darkened doorway, felt like a potential hazard, a hidden threat. Every corner could hide an infected, waiting to lurch forward, to shatter the fragile silence, to unleash the chaos again. At one point, on a lower level, we heard a door slam shut, a sharp, echoing bang that made us jump, our hearts leaping into our throats, followed by frantic, rapid footfalls, fading quickly into the distance. We never found out who or what had made that sound. Survivor fleeing? Or a group of infected shuffling around, drawn by some unseen, unheard signal? We didn't stop to investigate, didn't dare to linger. We just kept moving, faster now, urgency propelling us forward. Finally, we reached it. A sign, small, almost hidden in the shadows, reading, "Roof access, maintenance personnel only." Hope flickered, a fragile flame in the overwhelming darkness. Sarah, her fingers trembling slightly, fished a small, tarnished key from her pocket, a small metal sliver of potential salvation. Apparently, she'd grabbed it earlier, almost instinctively, anticipating she might need to hide, to escape, to find a way out. She inserted the key into the lock, her breath held, her eyes fixed on the door handle. A click, small but distinct. The lock disengaged. The door was unlocked. Inside, a narrow set of concrete steps spiraled upwards, swallowed by shadows. A stale draft of air wafted down, carrying the musty smell of old mop buckets, dust, and something else. Something indefinable, something unsettling. Our lantern beams danced nervously along the damp concrete walls, illuminating peeling paint, cobwebs hanging like macabre decorations. The tension was suffocating, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, from behind us, From the darkness at the bottom of the steps, we heard it. A sudden moan. Deep, guttural, inhuman. We spun around, our hearts leaping into our throats, adrenaline surging, fear turning our blood to ice. A figure, at the bottom of the steps, silhouetted against the faint light from the hallway. An infected, hospital staff member, uniform stained and discolored in the dim light, swaying unsteadily, then lunging for the door, for us. Instinct took over. No time to think, no time to react. Just pure, primal survival. We pushed, shoved, threw ourselves against the door, slamming it shut with a collective, desperate shove. Hearts hammering against our ribs, lungs burning. We could feel the wood vibrating under the impact as the figure crashed against the door from the other side, letting out another rasping, inhuman groan. Henry, quick-thinking, resourceful, jammed a heavy metal rod, a discarded mop handle lying nearby, through the door handle, barricading it, sealing it shut. For now, we were safe. For now, trapped on the stairwell side of the locked door. But we knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wouldn't hold. Not if more infected arrived. And more were coming. They were always coming. We climbed the final steps, our movements frantic, desperate, fueled by a primal urge to escape, to survive. At the top of the stairs, another heavy door. The door to the roof. Sarah, her hands trembling, turned the rusty metal knob. It creaked open, a long, agonizing groan that echoed in the confined space. A cool breeze swept over us, carrying the faint scent of smoke, the distant murmur of the city, the promise of something. We stepped onto the roof. The night sky stretched overhead, vast and indifferent, a canvas of stars indifferent to the chaos unfolding below. The cityscape lay in darkness, a sprawling labyrinth of shadows, punctuated only by the faint, flickering glow of a few scattered streetlights, like dying embers in a vast, cold wasteland. The cool air on my face was a stark, shocking reminder of how claustrophobic, how suffocating, the hospital's corridors had become. We'd escaped the building, for now, but had we escaped the nightmare? We explored the rooftop, a tarred expanse of flat roofing material, vents and pipes jutting up like metallic weeds, scanning frantically for any sign of rescue, any sign of immediate danger. The faint outline of the horizon hinted at the approaching dawn, a slow, reluctant lightening of the eastern sky. Dr. Malik peered cautiously over the edge, checking for a safe way down, a fire escape, an exterior staircase. But we were high up, stranded on a rooftop island, with no visible way to descend. No helicopter landing pad, no ladder, just tarred surfaces and rusting vents. A sense of helplessness settled over us, heavy, suffocating. We'd escaped the immediate threat of the infected inside the building, traded one prison for another, maybe even a worse one. The city beyond, stretching out in the pre-dawn darkness, looked eerily silent, menacingly empty. Were we truly safer here? Exposed to the elements, cut off from supplies, with no clear path to escape? In a small, shed-like structure on the roof, likely used for maintenance supplies, we discovered a relic. An old portable radio, battered, rusted, but intact. It had a large, telescoping antenna, and Tiana, bless her resourceful spirit, fiddled with the knobs, twisting, turning, desperately trying to find any signal, any voice in the static. The device crackled to life, spitting out bursts of white noise, then, miraculously, briefly, something resembling an automated message pierced through the static, a garbled, broken fragment. Emergency alert, zombie outbreak, then silence. More static. The signal died again, swallowed by the noise. We stared at each other, equal parts relieved, desperately relieved, to have heard anything at all, any confirmation that the world outside still existed, and panicked, utterly panicked, by the chilling confirmation of the ongoing crisis. Zombie outbreak. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was real as the cold morning breeze, as real as the groans echoing from the stairwell below. Tiana, undeterred, continued to adjust the antenna, searching through different frequencies, her fingers flying across the rusted knobs. But the only thing that came through the speakers was more static, an endless, meaningless hiss, or an occasional, faint, ghostly beep, like a heartbeat fading into silence. Our small group huddled together in a tight circle, hugging our thin jackets tighter against the chill pre-dawn breeze, the silence broken only by the crackle of the useless radio and the distant, unsettling groans from below. Dr. Malik raised the question again. The question that had been hanging unspoken in the air between us for hours, the question that now demanded an answer. Do we try to get out of the city? Or do we remain here and hope? Hope for rescue? Margaret, her face pale and drawn, hugged her knees to her chest, trembling uncontrollably. What if no one comes? She whispered, her voice breaking. What if this is everywhere? Henry leaned forward, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying realization. The zombie outbreak. It might be citywide, maybe even nationwide. He swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. But there has to be. There has to be a military, a rescue operation. They wouldn't abandon us, would they? The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Lacey, shivering despite the blankets we'd given her, voiced another, equally pressing concern. We hardly have any food or water, and who knows how long this lockdown will last. Sarah added, her voice grim, her gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. If we go back down, we risk running into more infected, more of those things. We weighed the impossible choices, the pros and cons, if they could even be called pros, of our desperate situation. With the hospital on full lockdown, the exits might be sealed, impenetrable. Even if we somehow managed to leave the building, to escape onto the streets, the city, the streets might be overrun, a death trap waiting to spring shut. Our supplies were dwindling, practically non-existent. But at least, here, on the roof, we had some shelter. A fragile sanctuary in the open air. The conversation went in circles, endless loops of fear and uncertainty, each argument, each desperate suggestion, punctuated by the distant, chilling groans we could still hear echoing from the stairwell below, a constant, terrifying reminder of the horrors that lurked just below our feet. Time passed, stretching out, distorting, blurring the edges of reality. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the sun's first rays finally broke over the horizon, painting the eastern sky in a dull, bruised orange glow, bathing the city in a pale, unsettling light. From our rooftop vantage point, we saw smoke rising in the distance, a thin, black plume curling into the morning sky from a few blocks away, as if a building had caught fire, consumed in the night's unfolding chaos. The emptiness of the streets in the early morning light was haunting. No cars moving, no people walking, just a hush, a silence so profound it felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. We gathered near the edge of the roof, huddled together against the morning chill, a quiet understanding passing between us, unspoken but deeply felt. No matter which path we chose, staying here, stranded on the rooftop, or attempting a desperate escape back into the building, back into the city, the future was uncertain, bleak, terrifyingly unknown. The radio remained useless, spitting out only static and broken fragments of forgotten broadcasts. The hospital below was still crawling with infected, a labyrinth of death waiting to be explored. And beyond the hospital grounds, beyond the city limits, beyond the horizon, who knew what horrors might be unfolding, what terrors awaited? As we stood there, silhouetted against the pale morning sky, Dr. Malik finally spoke up, his voice low, resolute, yet tinged with a deep weariness, a quiet desperation. We can't just wait, he said, his gaze sweeping over our huddled group, his eyes meeting each of ours in turn. Sooner or later, we'll need food, medical supplies, a safer place. We either try to make a run for it, try to find a secure zone, somewhere inside the hospital that's more defensible. But we can't stay on this rooftop indefinitely. I glanced around at the others. Margaret, Tiana, Derek, Lacey, Henry, Sarah, their faces illuminated by the dawn's cold light, reflected the same worry, the same fear, the same desperate uncertainty that gnawed at my own heart. None of us wanted to descend back into the darkness, back into the building, back into the labyrinth of infected hallways. But staying here, exposed on the rooftop, was no guarantee of rescue. We were caught, trapped, in a lose-lose scenario, with the entire city, possibly the entire world, in the grip of a zombie outbreak. "What do we do?" Tiana asked, her voice shaking, barely audible above the whisper of the morning breeze. Dr. Malik looked at me again, his gaze searching, questioning, seeking support, seeking something. Leadership, maybe? Hope? I felt a lump forming in my throat, a knot of fear and uncertainty tightening in my chest. I tried to muster something, anything, that felt like courage, like resolve, like a plan. We gather what we can," I said, my voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength as I spoke, as the words formed in my mouth. "We gather what we can, and then we decide. Together." Even as the words left my lips, a muffled crash rose from below, from deep within the hospital's interior, a sound of splintering wood, of collapsing structures, as if something large, something heavy, had just given way, collapsing into the darkness. It served as a stark, chilling reminder that danger was still close. Always close. The morning breeze swept over us, carrying the faint, acrid tang of smoke and the distant, mournful echo of sirens, somewhere out there in the dying city. And that's where our story hangs. We stand on the rooftop of a locked-down hospital with a handful of dwindling supplies and a handful of desperate survivors, facing an uncertain world, a world gone mad. An emergency alert echoes across static-filled airwaves, a broken promise of rescue, of hope. Inside the hallways below, shadows shift, and the silence echoes with the guttural groans of the infected. We are caught between two impossible choices, neither offering a clear path to safety. No one knows how long the lockdown will last. No one knows if reinforcements will ever come. We've glimpsed the horrors below, the moaning shapes that shuffle through corridors once filled with life, with healing, with hope. We've heard the dire warnings, the chilling pronouncements of a zombie outbreak, while clinging to the fragile, dwindling hope that maybe, just maybe, help is still out there. Somewhere. We are left standing on the edge of the unknown, the sun rising slowly, reluctantly, on a city forever changed, forever broken. Our fate, and the fate of countless others, suspended in the quiet morning air. Will we find a way out? Will we survive this nightmare? Or are we already out of time? I wish I had a final answer for you. But the truth is, I don't. And that, my friends, is where we leave our story. For now, thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, if it kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling, creepy pastors. Wait, scratch that. Creepy tales. My apologies, folks. Force of habit. Anyway, your support keeps this channel alive, keeps these stories coming, keeps the shadows at bay, just a little bit longer. Until next time, stay vigilant. Remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse. Stay tuned for part 2. Let me know in the comments, what do you think they should do next? Escape the hospital? Or try to fortify their position and wait for rescue? Your comments might just influence where the story goes next. So, let me hear from you. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help.